The night before my 18th birthday, I found my little sister Madison destroying the cake I had spent 3 days making for my own party. She stood there, chocolate frosting smeared across her designer dress, screaming that nobody cared about her anymore. When I tried to stop her, she threw the serving knife at my face, missing by inches. That is when I realized something I should have seen. Years ago, my family had raised a monster, and I was nothing more than her personal punching bag. Everything was about to change. Looking back now, I can see the signs were always there. My name is Sherry, and I am 23 years old telling you this story from my own apartment in downtown Denver, a place I never thought I would be able to afford 5 years ago. But that night, standing in our kitchen with chocolate cake splattered across the marble countertops my parents were so proud of, I finally understood the truth about my family. Madison was 13 then, barely reaching my shoulder, but she wielded power in our household that I had never possessed. Our parents, David and Patricia, had been making excuses for her behavior since she could walk. When she was 7 and broke my science fair project the night before the competition, they bought new supplies and told me accidents happen. When she was 10 and deliberately ruined my homecoming dress with permanent markers, they shrugged and said she was just being creative. When she was 12 and stole $60 from my babysitting money, they claimed she was simply curious about how money worked. I had been working part-time jobs since I turned 15, saving every penny for college, while Madison received everything she wanted without question. Private tutoring sessions, dance lessons at the most expensive studio in town, designer clothes that cost more than I made in a month. I assumed our parents could afford these luxuries because Dad worked as a regional sales manager and Mom held a position at the local bank. The night after the cake incident, I could not sleep. The image of that knife flying toward my face kept replaying in my mind. I wandered downstairs for some water and heard my parents talking in hushed voices in Dad's home office. The door was slightly open and their conversation made my blood run cold. "We cannot keep taking money from Sherry's account," Mom was saying, her voice strained with worry. "She's going to notice soon." "Madison needs those dance competitions," Dad replied firmly. "The entry fees are expensive, but she has real talent. Sherry has always been independent. She will figure out college funding somehow." My legs felt weak. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, struggling to process what I was hearing. For 3 years, I had been depositing my paychecks into a savings account, watching the balance grow toward my college dreams. Every weekend shift at the grocery store, every evening of babysitting neighborhood kids, every birthday and Christmas check from relatives, it had all been going toward my future. "How much is left?" Mom asked. "About $800, Dad admitted. "But Madison's spring recital costume costs $300, and she needs new point shoes." $800, out of the nearly $6,000 I had saved. My parents had been stealing from me to fund my sister's excessive lifestyle, and they were discussing it like it was a minor inconvenience. "Maybe we should tell Sherry," Mom suggested weakly. "Absolutely not," Dad snapped. "She would never understand. Madison has special needs that require investment. Sherry is academically gifted enough to earn scholarships. Madison needs our financial support to develop her talents." I crept back upstairs, my mind reeling. Madison had no special needs except an inability to hear the word no. She was not exceptionally talented at dance. She was mediocre at best. But our parents had convinced themselves that throwing money at her activities would somehow transform her into the perfect daughter they wanted to show off to their friends. That night, I pulled up my online banking account and stared at the balance. All those hours of work, all that careful budgeting, reduced to almost nothing. I had been financially supporting my sister's spoiled lifestyle without even knowing it. Every tantrum, every demand, every expensive whim had been funded by my labor while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to save money. The worst part was not the theft itself, but the casual way they discussed it. Like my dreams and hard work were disposable. Like I existed solely to enable Madison's comfort. I sat in my small bedroom surrounded by secondhand furniture I had bought with my own money and realized I was nothing more than an unpaid servant in my own home. That was the night I started planning my escape. My 18th birthday should have been a celebration of freedom, but instead it became the final proof that my family saw me as expendable. I had worked extra shifts for 2 weeks to afford decorations and food for a small party with my closest friends from school and work. Nothing elaborate, just pizza sodas and the homemade chocolate cake that Madison had destroyed the night before. I spent my birthday morning at the grocery store buying ingredients to make a replacement cake. Madison watched me work in the kitchen, and for once she seemed genuinely calm. She even offered to help hang streamers in our living room, which surprised me so much I almost dropped the frosting bowl. "I'm sorry about last night," she said quietly, adjusting a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Sherry." "I was just feeling left out." Her apology seemed sincere, and I desperately wanted to believe she was capable of change. Maybe turning 18 would mark a new chapter for our entire family. Maybe Madison was finally growing up. My friends started arriving at 6 o'clock. Casey, my best friend since sophomore year, brought a gift bag full of college supplies. Trevor and Amanda from work pooled their money to buy me a new backpack. My classmate Jennifer gave me a beautiful journal with an encouraging note about my future. For the first hour, everything felt perfect. I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, celebrating this milestone in my life. Madison initially stayed upstairs, which I thought was respectful. But as the evening progressed, she began making small appearances. First, she came down for a drink and managed to bump into Casey spilling grape juice on her white shirt. Then she joined our conversation circle uninvited, interrupting every story with comments about herself. When Trevor mentioned his summer job plans, Madison launched into a detailed description of her dance schedule that had nothing to do with the topic. I tried to redirect the conversation, but Madison was relentless. She positioned herself directly next to me on the couch, leaning against me in a way that forced me to the edge. When Amanda complimented my cake, Madison announced that she had helped make it, which was completely false. Every attempt I made to enjoy my own party was quietly sabotaged. The real trouble started when I began opening gifts. My friends had been saving up to buy me meaningful presents, and I was genuinely touched by their thoughtfulness. But the moment that changed everything was when I opened an envelope from my guidance counselor containing acceptance letters from 3 different colleges, each offering partial scholarship opportunities. Casey squealed with excitement, and Trevor started calculating how much money the scholarships would save me. Jennifer grabbed my hands and told me how proud she was. For one beautiful moment, I felt like my hard work was finally being recognized, like my future was bright and full of possibilities. That was when Madison collapsed. She dropped to the floor, dramatically clutching her throat and gasping for breath. Her face turned red, and she started making choking sounds that immediately panicked everyone in the room. Mom and Dad rushed downstairs from their bedroom, where they had been giving us space for the party. "Madison, what is wrong?" Mom screamed, kneeling beside her on the carpet. "Cannot breathe," Madison wheezed, pointing at the food table. "Something in the cake, allergic reaction." This was complete nonsense. Madison had no food allergies. She ate everything without restriction and had consumed 3 pieces of birthday cake without any problems. But Mom and Dad immediately went into crisis mode, calling 911 and gathering Madison into their arms like she was dying. My friends stood around helplessly as paramedics arrived and loaded Madison onto a stretcher. The birthday celebration ended abruptly as everyone grabbed their coats and mumbled awkward goodbyes. Within 30 minutes, I was alone in our living room, staring at half-eaten pizza and scattered gift wrap while my family rushed to the emergency room. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning up my acceptance letters forgotten on the coffee table. The beautiful cake I had remade lay half destroyed on its platter, accusatory crumbs scattered across the dining room table. My friends texted worried messages about Madison's condition, and I had to pretend I was concerned too. At 11:30, my parents returned home with Madison, who appeared completely recovered. The hospital had run extensive tests and found absolutely nothing wrong with her. No allergic reaction, no breathing problems, no medical emergency of any kind. "The doctors think it might have been anxiety," Mom explained, stroking Madison's hair. She got overwhelmed by all the excitement and had a panic attack. Madison nodded weakly, milking the sympathy for everything it was worth. She claimed she felt much better now, but needed to rest because the experience had been so traumatic. Dad carried her upstairs like she was a fragile piece of glass, and Mom followed with a cup of herbal tea. Before going to bed, Dad turned to me with an expression of mild annoyance. "Sherry, you need to be more careful about food safety when you have guests over. Madison could have been seriously hurt." I stared at him in disbelief. My sister had faked a medical emergency to ruin my birthday party, and somehow it was my fault for being careless with food preparation. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. "She is not allergic to anything," I said quietly. "The doctors said panic attacks can mimic allergic reactions." Mom called from the staircase. "Madison was probably overwhelmed by all the noise and activity. Maybe next time we should have a smaller celebration so she feels more comfortable." Next time. They were already planning to restrict my future celebrations to accommodate Madison's jealousy. I looked around our living room, still bearing traces of my ruined party, and realized nothing would ever change. No matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, Madison would always find a way to make it about herself. That night, I lay awake staring at my college acceptance letters and made the most important decision of my life. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, and I was done being a victim in my own home. The week following my birthday disaster confirmed everything I suspected about my family's priorities. On Monday morning, Dad announced new household rules designed to protect Madison's emotional well-being. No more parties unless Madison felt comfortable with the guest list. No more celebrations that might make her feel excluded. No more activities that could trigger her anxiety. Mom suggested I apologize to Madison for creating a stressful environment. When I refused, they accused me of being selfish and inconsiderate. Madison herself played the victim beautifully, claiming she still felt sick whenever she looked at food and needed extra support during this difficult time. I realized I was living in a house where my achievements were seen as threats to Madison's self-esteem, where my happiness was considered disruptive to family harmony. Every college acceptance letter, every scholarship opportunity, every sign that I might escape their dysfunction was treated like an act of aggression against my sister. But I had one advantage they did not know about. I had been financially independent for years. While they were stealing from my savings account, I had been building relationships with my employers and learning to manage my own life. At the grocery store where I worked weekends, my manager Janet had mentioned several times that she needed reliable help during night shifts. The position came with a small pay increase and the possibility of more hours. I started researching my options. Colorado law allowed 18-year-olds to leave home without parental permission. I could sign my own lease, make my own medical decisions, and control my own bank account. The only thing stopping me was fear of the unknown, but staying was becoming more terrifying than leaving. Casey became my secret ally in this planning phase. Her older brother Ryan owned a small moving company, and she offered to help me relocate when I was ready. We spent our lunch breaks at school researching affordable apartments and calculating living expenses. I learned about tenant rights utility deposits and rental applications. The perfect opportunity presented itself when I found a studio apartment above Murphy's Diner on the edge of downtown Denver. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was looking for someone to work the overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in exchange for reduced rent. The apartment was tiny but clean with its own bathroom and a small kitchenette. Most importantly, it was available immediately for someone willing to work nights and keep an eye on the restaurant. I met with Mrs. Chen after school on Thursday and was hired on the spot. She needed someone responsible and trustworthy, and my work history impressed her. The job paid $9 per hour plus tips from late-night customers, and the rent was only $400 per month. It was not luxurious, but it was independence. The plan had to be executed carefully. Madison had a piano recital on Saturday evening that would keep my parents occupied for at least 3 hours. Ryan agreed to help me move during that window, and Casey organized a group of our friends to pack everything quickly. I spent Friday gradually moving my most important belongings to Casey's house. Clothes, books, my laptop, personal documents, everything small enough to fit in my school backpack. I told my parents I was working extra shifts to save money for college, which was technically true. They were too focused on Madison's recital preparations to pay attention to my activities. Saturday arrived with surprising calm. Madison spent the afternoon practicing piano pieces she should have mastered weeks earlier, while Mom fussed over her dress and Dad adjusted his camera equipment. I volunteered to skip the recital, claiming I needed to work, which actually pleased them because they wanted Madison to have their undivided attention. At 5:30, they left for the music school with Madison dressed like a princess in a new outfit that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. I watched their car disappear down our street and immediately called Ryan. The moving process took exactly 2 hours. Ryan and 3 of his friends loaded my furniture, electronics, and remaining clothes into their truck with military efficiency. Casey packed my personal items while I gathered important documents from my room. Birth certificate, social security card, high school transcripts, bank statements, everything I would need to prove my identity and independence. The hardest part was leaving behind my childhood memories. Photo albums, stuffed animals artwork from elementary school, these things had no practical value, but they represented the happier parts of my past. I took one small box of irreplaceable items and left the rest behind. By 8 o'clock, my room was completely empty except for the furniture that belonged to my parents. It looked like I had never existed there at all. I wrote a brief note and left it on my stripped bed. I am 18 now. I have moved out. Do not look for me until you are ready to treat me with respect. Ryan drove me to Murphy's Diner where Mrs. Chen was waiting with my apartment key and work uniform. The studio was exactly what I expected, small, simple, but mine. I owned every item in that space. Nobody could take it away from me, destroy it out of jealousy, or steal from me to fund someone else's lifestyle. At 10:45, I put on my work apron and went downstairs to begin my first shift. Mrs. Chen showed me how to operate the coffee machine, handle late-night orders, and lock up the building. The work was straightforward: serve coffee and simple food to night shift workers, taxi drivers, and insomniacs. Keep the place clean and safe until morning. My first customer was a nurse heading home from the hospital. She ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin, left a $2 tip, and told me I looked too young to be working alone at midnight. I smiled and explained that I was 18 and supporting myself through college. Saying those words out loud felt like a declaration of independence. At some point during that first night, probably around 3 a.m., when the diner was quiet and empty, I realized I had done it. I had escaped. Whatever chaos was happening at my family's house, whatever drama Madison was creating, whatever manipulation my parents were attempting, none of it could touch me anymore. For the first time in years, I fell asleep in complete peace. Sunday morning brought the first sign that my departure had been discovered. My phone, which I had prudently changed to a new number the day before, remained silent, but Casey texted me updates from mutual friends who lived in my neighborhood. Apparently, my parents had spent the early morning driving around town looking for me, visiting my previous workplace, and calling everyone they could think of who might know my location. At Murphy's Diner, I worked my shift from 11 p.m. Saturday to 7 a.m. Sunday, then slept until 2 in the afternoon. Mrs. Chen had given me Monday off to get settled, so I spent Sunday evening organizing my new space and mentally preparing for the consequences of my decision. The real fallout became apparent over the next week through secondhand sources. Casey reported that my parents had initially dismissed my departure as typical teenage dramatics. Dad told neighbors I was probably staying with a friend and would come home when I got hungry. Mom assumed I was trying to scare them and would return within a few days. Madison, meanwhile, was thriving in the immediate aftermath. She moved into my larger bedroom without permission, claiming she needed more space for her dance equipment. With me gone, she became the sole focus of our parents' attention, which was exactly what she had always wanted. But by Thursday, cracks in their confidence began showing. The first major problem was utilities. For the past 2 years, I had been responsible for organizing our household's bill payments. Dad earned the money, but I handled the scheduling, online payments, and deadline tracking because I was more organized and had better attention to detail. Without me managing this system, bills started falling through the cracks. The electricity was shut off on Wednesday afternoon because nobody remembered the payment due date. Mom had to leave work early to deal with the power company, pay late fees, and restore service. The experience embarrassed her because neighbors noticed their house going dark in the middle of the day. More problems emerged quickly. Madison missed a dental appointment that I had scheduled months in advance, costing them a $50 cancellation fee. Dad could not find his insurance paperwork when he needed to file a claim because I had been organizing all family documents in a filing system only I understood. The grocery shopping became chaotic because nobody else knew our family's dietary preferences budget limitations or which stores offered the best prices. Madison's school performance started declining immediately. Her teachers began sending notes home about missing assignments and incomplete projects. Without my organizational support, she struggled to keep track of homework deadlines, test dates, and project requirements. I had been functioning as her unofficial academic assistant for years, helping her plan study schedules and proofreading her work. The house itself began deteriorating. I had been responsible for minor maintenance tasks, like replacing light bulbs, unclogging drains, and organizing seasonal decorations. More importantly, I had been managing our family calendar, ensuring everyone knew about appointments, school events, and social obligations. Mom missed an important deadline at work because she forgot about a client meeting I had written on the refrigerator calendar. Dad could not locate tax documents that I had organized alphabetically in labeled folders. The yard started looking unkempt because I had been the one scheduling lawn care and maintaining our garden. By Friday, exactly 1 week after my departure, my parents began calling my previous workplace. My former manager at the grocery store told them I had transferred to another location, but could not provide my contact information due to company policy. They tried calling my school, but I had already submitted my address change forms and requested that my information remain confidential. Casey reported that Mom and Dad drove past the school parking lot multiple times, hoping to spot me during class changes. They visited the public library where I used to study, checked coffee shops where I had worked on homework, and even went to the movie theater where I had taken Madison several times. Their search efforts were complicated by Madison's increasingly demanding behavior. With me gone, she had no target for her tantrums except our parents, and they were not as tolerant of her outbursts when they were stressed about other problems. When Madison threw a fit about not getting a new dress for an upcoming dance performance, Dad snapped at her to stop being ridiculous. When she demanded expensive takeout because she did not like Mom's cooking, Mom told her to eat what was available or go hungry. Madison was discovering that being the only child was not as wonderful as she had imagined. Our parents expected more from her, now that I was not there to handle responsibilities. They asked her to help with household tasks, manage her own schedule, and contribute to family functioning. She had no experience with any of these expectations and reacted poorly to the increased pressure. By the end of the first week, my family was beginning to understand that I had not been just another teenager living in their house. I had been the invisible foundation that kept their daily life functioning smoothly. Without me, managing logistics, organizing systems, and enabling Madison's dependency, their comfortable routine collapsed into chaos. But they still had not learned the most important lesson. They still saw my departure as something that had happened to them rather than something they had caused through years of unfair treatment. They missed my labor, not my personhood. They wanted me back to restore their convenience, not because they valued my well-being. That distinction would become crucial in the weeks ahead as their situation continued deteriorating and I continued building my independent life. 3 weeks into my new life, I was settling into a routine that felt surprisingly sustainable. Working nights at Murphy's Diner gave me time during the day to attend my community college classes, which I had enrolled in using my scholarship money and the savings my parents had not yet stolen. Mrs. Chen proved to be an excellent employer, offering flexible scheduling and genuine encouragement for my educational goals. Meanwhile, Madison's world was crumbling in ways I could only have dreamed about during my worst moments of frustration with her behavior. Casey kept me updated on the neighborhood drama, and the details were both satisfying and shocking. Without me as her primary target for manipulation, Madison was directing her tantrums toward our parents, who were far less tolerant than I had been. When she demanded new dance shoes that cost $200, Dad told her to earn the money herself. When she threw a screaming fit about not getting to choose the family's dinner plans, Mom sent her to her room without food. The coddling and instant gratification she had grown accustomed to were disappearing rapidly. At school, Madison's academic performance was deteriorating dramatically. Her English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called home to discuss missing assignments and declining test scores. During the conversation, an uncomfortable truth emerged. Many of Madison's previous successful projects showed signs of collaboration that went far beyond normal parental assistance. Mrs. Rodriguez had suspected for months that Madison's work quality was inconsistent with her classroom performance, but she had attributed the discrepancy to test anxiety or learning differences. With me gone, however, Madison's true academic abilities became glaringly obvious. Her essays lacked the organization and depth that had previously earned her good grades. Her research projects showed no evidence of the thorough preparation that had characterized her earlier work. The situation reached a crisis point when Madison was caught cheating on a major history exam. She had written detailed notes on her palm and inside her jacket sleeves, covering topics she claimed she could not understand. When confronted by her teacher, Madison broke down crying and blamed everything on me. My sister always helped me study. She sobbed to the principal. She made all my notes and explained everything. I do not know how to do it without her. This confession opened a Pandora's box of academic dishonesty that had been building for years. Teachers began reviewing Madison's previous work with fresh eyes, comparing her in-class performance to her submitted assignments. The pattern was undeniable. Her best work had been completed at home with extensive help, while her independent classroom efforts were mediocre at best. The principal, Dr. Martinez, discovered something even more disturbing during his investigation. Madison had been using my academic achievements on her college preparation materials, my National Honor Society membership, my volunteer hours at the local food bank, my part-time work experience. She'd claimed credit for all of it on her preliminary college applications. Dr. Martinez called my parents for an emergency conference to discuss Madison's pattern of academic dishonesty and identity fraud. The meeting was devastating for my family's reputation. Other parents in our school district heard about the scandal, and Madison became known as the girl who stole her sister's accomplishments. The consequences extended beyond academics. Madison's social circle, which had always been somewhat shallow, began fragmenting as her true personality emerged without me as a buffer. Her friends started noticing her selfishness and dramatic behavior now that she had no one else to blame for problems. When she threw a tantrum at a birthday party because the attention was not focused on her, several classmates stopped inviting her to social events. Her dance performance, which had always been the centerpiece of her identity, also suffered without my organizational support. I had been keeping track of her class schedules, competition deadlines, and costume requirements for years. Without me managing these details, Madison missed important rehearsals, showed up unprepared for performances, and failed to submit registration forms on time. The final blow came when Madison lost the scholarship opportunity she had been counting on for her dance training. The competition required a portfolio of academic achievements, volunteer work, and personal essays. With her cheating scandal on record and no legitimate accomplishments to showcase, Madison's application was rejected immediately. Her response to this rejection was the most violent tantrum I had ever heard about secondhand. Casey's mother witnessed it through their shared fence when Madison screamed at our parents for 30 minutes, blaming them for not helping her, enough blaming me for abandoning her and demanding they fix everything immediately. She threw a planter through the sliding glass door. Casey told me during one of our coffee dates, "My mom said it sounded like someone was being murdered in your backyard." The property damage was extensive and expensive, but the emotional damage was even worse. Madison had built her entire self-image around being the special, talented daughter who deserved extra attention and resources. Without my support system enabling her lifestyle, she was forced to confront her own mediocrity and selfishness. Our parents were finally seeing Madison's true nature without my presence to absorb her worst behavior. Every manipulative tactic, Every unreasonable demand, every explosive reaction was now directed at them. They were experiencing firsthand what I had endured for years, and they were not handling it well. But the most telling aspect of this whole situation was that nobody in my family had attempted to apologize for their treatment of me or acknowledge that their favoritism had created this monster. They were upset about the consequences of Madison's behavior, but they still had not connected those consequences to their own parenting choices. That revelation was coming, though, and it would be more painful than anything they had experienced so far. 2 months after my departure, I had established a stable rhythm that felt like real independence. My grades at community college were excellent. My work performance at Murphy's Diner had earned me a small raise, and I was saving money consistently for the first time in years. Mrs. Chen had become something of a mentor, teaching me about small business management and encouraging my plans to eventually transfer to a 4-year university. I felt proud of what I had accomplished on my own, but I was not prepared for the nuclear explosion that was about to demolish whatever remained of my family's facade. The catalyst was my father's mother, Grandma Helen, who lived in Phoenix and visited Denver twice a year for major holidays. She arrived on a Thursday evening in early April, expecting to see both of her granddaughters at the traditional family dinner she had requested for Friday night. Casey happened to be walking her dog past our house when Grandma Helen's taxi pulled up. She watched through our front window as my grandmother entered the living room and immediately asked, "Where is Sherry? I brought her a graduation gift." The conversation that followed could be heard through the thin walls of our ranch-style home. Grandma Helen's voice grew increasingly loud and angry as my parents tried to explain my absence without admitting their role in driving me away. They told her I was going through a rebellious phase and had moved out to assert my independence. Grandma Helen was not fooled. She had always been sharp, and she knew our family dynamics better than my parents realized. She started asking pointed questions about why I had left, what had triggered my departure, and whether they had tried to make amends. The more they deflected, the more suspicious she became. "Sherry has been the responsible one since she was 10 years old," Grandma Helen declared. "If she moved out the day after her 18th birthday, you did something to drive her away." Madison chose that moment to make her entrance, apparently expecting sympathy and attention from her grandmother. She launched into a dramatic monologue about how difficult life had been since I left, how I had abandoned the family selfishly, and how she was suffering because of my cruelty. Grandma Helen listened to this performance with growing disgust. She had witnessed Madison's tantrums during previous visits and had often wondered why my parents tolerated such behavior. Now, hearing Madison blame me for the consequences of her own actions, something clicked into place for my grandmother. "Madison, go to your room," Grandma Helen ordered sharply. "I need to speak with your parents privately." Madison was not accustomed to being dismissed by anyone, and her response was immediate and explosive. She screamed that Grandma Helen was being unfair, that everyone always took my side, that she was the real victim in this situation. When Grandma Helen stood firm, Madison's tantrum escalated into the worst display of behavior our house had ever witnessed. She began throwing everything within reach: picture frames, decorative vases, Mom's collection of ceramic figurines. All of it went flying across the living room. But the final act of destruction targeted something irreplaceable: Mom's jewelry collection, which included several heirloom pieces that had been passed down through 3 generations. Madison grabbed the wooden jewelry box from the mantel and hurled it against the hardwood floor with all her strength. The box shattered, scattering rings, necklaces, and earrings across the room. Among the destruction was Mom's grandmother's wedding ring, a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, and a diamond brooch that was worth several $1,000s. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stood in the wreckage, breathing heavily, waiting for someone to comfort her or clean up the mess. Instead, she found 3 adults staring at her with expressions of horror and disgust. Grandma Helen spoke first. "Patricia David, this child needs professional help. This is not normal behavior for a 13-year-old. Mom was on her hands and knees frantically gathering the scattered jewelry and trying to assess the damage. Several pieces were bent beyond repair, and the sentimental value of the destroyed items was incalculable. Dad stood frozen, apparently unable to process that his precious daughter had just destroyed thousands of dollars worth of irreplaceable family heirlooms. Madison's reaction to their shock was to double down on her victim narrative. She claimed the jewelry box had slipped from her hands accidentally, that she had been trying to put it somewhere safe, that everyone was overreacting to a simple mistake. When no one believed this obvious lie, she shifted tactics and blamed me again. "This would not have happened if Sherry had not abandoned us," she declared. "I have been so stressed and upset that I cannot control myself. It is all her fault." That statement broke something fundamental in our parents' denial system. Even they could not ignore the absurdity of blaming me for Madison's deliberate destruction of property. The incident forced them to confront the monster they had created through years of enabling and excuse-making. But their first instinct was still to seek the easy solution. Instead of accepting responsibility for Madison's behavior or committing to serious consequences, they decided the answer was to force me to come home and restore the family's previous dysfunction. Dad spent Saturday morning tracking down my workplace. He discovered my employment at Murphy's Diner and showed up during my afternoon break, demanding that I return home immediately to help deal with the family crisis. His approach was exactly what I had expected, authoritative, entitled, and completely lacking in self-awareness. "Sherry, this independence experiment has gone far enough," he announced, as if my departure had been a temporary tantrum rather than a permanent decision. "Madison is struggling without you, and your mother is devastated. You need to come home and help us fix this situation." I stared at him across the diner booth, marveling at his complete inability to understand what he had done wrong. He saw Madison's behavior as a problem that required my intervention, not as a consequence of his own parenting failures. He wanted me to return to my role as Madison's unpaid therapist and household manager, without any acknowledgement of how I had been mistreated. "I'm not coming home," I said calmly. "Madison's behavior is not my responsibility, and I will not sacrifice my future to enable her problems." Dad's face turned red with anger. He demanded to know where I was living, threatened to cut off my health insurance, and insisted that I was being ungrateful after everything they had done for me. When I remained unmoved, he played his final card. "Fine. If you want to be independent, then you can pay for Madison's therapy and the jewelry replacement yourself. She is your sister, and you have a responsibility to help repair the damage your abandonment caused." The audacity of this demand was breathtaking. He wanted me to pay for the consequences of problems I had not created to fund solutions for behavior I had never enabled to take financial responsibility for damage I had not caused. It was the perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with our family dynamic. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a manila folder I had been preparing for months. Inside were copies of bank statements showing the money my parents had stolen from my college fund documentation of my work hours and earnings, and a detailed timeline of Madison's behavior problems that predated my departure. "Dad, before I pay for anything, I want you to repay the $5,200 you stole from my savings account," I said, sliding the documents across the table. "I also want you to explain to Grandma Helen how you funded Madison's lifestyle by stealing from my college money." Dad's angry expression crumbled as he realized I had evidence of their financial theft. He tried to stammer excuses about borrowing and planning to pay me back, but the documentation was irrefutable. They had systematically robbed my future to pay for Madison's present, and I had proof. I stood up from the booth, leaving the folder on the table. "I have consulted with a legal aid attorney about possible theft charges. If you want to discuss payment obligations, we can start with what you owe me." Dad sat in stunned silence as I returned to work. For the first time in my life, I had held my parents accountable for their actions instead of accepting blame for problems I had not caused. The shift in power was dramatic and irreversible. That evening, Grandma Helen called every relative she could think of to tell them about Madison's rampage and my parents' financial theft. By Sunday morning, the entire extended family knew the truth about our household dysfunction. The shame and social consequences my parents had been avoiding for years finally caught up with them. But Madison's response to losing her jewelry destruction leverage was even more destructive than anyone anticipated. When she realized that blaming me was no longer working, she escalated to a level of violence that forced my parents to confront the reality they had been denying for 13 years. Their perfect little princess was completely out of control, and they had no idea how to stop her. 6 months after my escape from home, I was thriving in ways I had never imagined possible. My community college grades were exceptional. My work at Murphy's Diner had led to increased responsibilities and better pay, and I had been accepted to transfer to University of Colorado, Denver for the following fall. Most importantly, I was living authentically for the first time in my adult life, making decisions based on my own values and goals rather than my family's dysfunction. The transformation in my daily existence was remarkable. I woke up each morning in my small apartment feeling peaceful and purposeful. No one screamed at me, blamed me for their problems, or stole my hard-earned money. I attended classes during the day, worked nights at the diner, and spent my free time studying or socializing with friends who respected and appreciated me. It was a simple life, but it belonged entirely to me. Meanwhile, my family's situation had continued deteriorating in spectacular fashion. Casey kept me updated on the neighborhood drama, and the reports were both vindicating and sobering. Madison's behavioral problems had escalated to the point where my parents were forced to seek professional intervention. She was now seeing a therapist twice a week and had been placed on academic probation at school for her cheating scandal. The jewelry destruction incident had cost them nearly $4,000 in replacement and repair expenses, money they did not have after years of overspending on Madison's activities. Dad had been forced to take a second job to cover the financial damage, while Mom was struggling to manage household responsibilities she had never handled independently. Grandma Helen had returned to Phoenix, but not before making her disappointment in my parents crystal clear to the entire extended family. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had previously seen our family as successful and well-adjusted now understood the truth about the favoritism and financial abuse that had driven me away. The social consequences were severe and ongoing. In early October, exactly 7 months after my departure, I received an unexpected phone call at work. Mrs. Chen answered the diner phone during my shift and handed it to me with a concerned expression. "Sherry, this is your mother." Mom's voice sounded strained and exhausted. "We have a family emergency and we need you to come home immediately." My first instinct was suspicion. My parents had not attempted to contact me directly since Dad's failed confrontation at the diner, and I assumed this was another manipulation tactic designed to guilt me into returning. I had learned to be skeptical of their claims about emergencies and crises. "What kind of emergency?" I asked calmly. "Madison is in the hospital." Mom said, her voice breaking slightly. "She had another episode, and this time she hurt herself. The doctors say she needs family support, and you are still her sister." I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this news. Despite everything Madison had put me through, I did not want her to be genuinely hurt or suffering. But I also recognized that my parents were likely trying to use her problems as leverage to manipulate me into resuming my old role as family caretaker. "I am sorry to hear that Madison is struggling," I said carefully, "but I am not the right person to help with her recovery. She needs professional support, not enabling from family members." Mom's response revealed the desperation underlying her request. She began crying and pleading, explaining that Madison had been asking for me, that the family was falling apart without me, that they needed me to come home and help put everything back together. After several minutes of this emotional manipulation, I agreed to meet with them, but only under my conditions. I would come to a neutral location with a friend present as a witness. I would listen to what they had to say, but I was not committing to any changes in my living situation or relationship with the family. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the university campus the following Saturday afternoon. I brought Casey with me for moral support and arrived to find both parents looking older and more worn down than I remembered. The months of stress had clearly taken a toll on their physical and emotional health. The conversation that followed was unlike any interaction I had ever had with my parents. For the first time in my life, they actually apologized for their treatment of me, acknowledged their favoritism toward Madison, and admitted that they had been wrong to steal money from my college savings. "We made terrible mistakes," Dad said, staring down at his coffee cup. "We enabled Madison's behavior because we thought we were protecting her, but we ended up hurting both of you in the process." Mom nodded tearfully. "You were always so responsible and capable that we took you for granted. We assumed you would be fine no matter what, so we focused all our attention on Madison because she seemed to need more help." Their apologies felt genuine, but I remained cautious. People could say the right words without truly understanding the depth of their mistakes or committing to real change. I needed to know whether they had learned anything meaningful from the consequences of their choices. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked directly. "We want you to be part of our family again," Mom said. "Madison is in therapy now, and we are working on changing our parenting approach. The therapist says family reunification could be helpful for everyone involved." I looked at them carefully, trying to assess their sincerity and their understanding of the situation. They seemed genuinely remorseful, but I suspected they were more sorry about the consequences of their behavior than the behavior itself. They missed the stability and convenience I had provided, not necessarily the person I actually was. "Before I consider any relationship with this family," I said slowly, "I need to see concrete evidence that you understand what went wrong and are committed to real change." I pulled out a piece of paper where I had written my conditions for any future contact. First, they needed to repay the money they had stolen from my college fund with interest on a payment plan I would approve. Second, they needed to attend family therapy consistently for at least 6 months to address the underlying issues that had created our dysfunctional dynamic. Third, Madison needed to take personal responsibility for her behavior and make genuine amends for the damage she had caused. Dad nodded reluctantly. "We can work out a repayment plan for your college money. It might take a year or 2, but we will pay you back with interest." "And the therapy?" I asked. "We are already seeing someone," Mom admitted. Madison's therapist recommended family sessions to help us understand how our parenting choices contributed to her problems. I studied their faces, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. They appeared genuinely defeated and exhausted, like people who had finally run out of excuses and were ready to face reality. But I had been disappointed by their promises before. "I will consider limited contact if you follow through on these commitments," I said finally. "But I am not moving back home, and I am not responsible for fixing anyone's problems. You created this situation, and you need to solve it yourselves." They agreed to my terms, though I could see the disappointment in their faces when they realized I would not be returning to my old role as family manager and Madison's caretaker. They wanted me back, but they still did not fully understand that the person they missed had been a victim, not a volunteer. 18 months later, I'm proud to report that my family has made genuine progress toward healing. My parents have consistently attended therapy and are slowly repaying my college fund as promised. Madison has been working with her therapist to understand how her behavior affected others and is learning to manage her emotions without manipulation or violence. The process has been difficult and sometimes painful, but it has also been necessary. Madison recently wrote me a letter taking full responsibility for her actions and apologizing for the pain she caused me. The letter was clearly written independently without coaching from our parents, and it demonstrated real growth and self-awareness. I have resumed limited contact with my family primarily through monthly dinners at restaurants where we can practice healthier communication patterns. Madison and I will never have the close sisterly relationship that some families enjoy, but we have developed a respectful distance that works for both of us. My parents have learned to see me as an independent adult rather than an unpaid family employee. They ask about my life support, my goals, and respect my boundaries. It took a dramatic crisis to force these changes, but the relationships we are building now are more honest and sustainable than what we had before. Most importantly, I have learned the most valuable lesson of my adult life. True family means mutual respect and support, not one-sided sacrifice. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from a toxic situation and let people face the consequences of their actions. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from relationships that diminish your worth and potential. My journey from victim to independent adult has not been easy, but it has been absolutely worth it. I am now a junior at University of Colorado, Denver, majoring in business administration with plans to open my own restaurant someday. Mrs. Chen has become my mentor and friend, and I am grateful every day for the opportunity she gave me when I needed it most. Looking back on that night when Madison destroyed my birthday cake, I realized it was not really about the dessert or even the party. It was about respect boundaries and the fundamental question of whether I would accept being treated as less valuable than my sister. By choosing to leave, I forced my entire family to confront truths they had been avoiding for years. The path to healing required everyone to do difficult work. My parents had to acknowledge their failures and change their behavior. Madison had to face the consequences of her actions and learn new ways of relating to others. And I had to find the strength to prioritize my own well-being over my family's comfort. Today I am proud of who I've become and optimistic about the future I am building. Some people might say I was too harsh or that families should forgive everything, but I believe that real love requires honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. By refusing to accept less than I deserved, I created the possibility for all of us to become better people. That is a lesson worth sharing, and I hope my story can help others find the courage to demand the respect and love they deserve, even when it requires walking away from relationships that no longer serve them. Have you ever been in a situation where family members treated you unfairly or took advantage of your kindness? How did you find the strength to set boundaries and prioritize your own well-being? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people who claim to love them. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you all the courage to create the life and relationships you truly deserve.